Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. The alien professor gave an impossible task. This human finished it in 3 hours. The violet sun of Zeltrix 9 hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the crimson dust fields and jagged crystalline spires that pierced the landscape like broken spears. It was the third rotation since the new students had arrived on the planet's surface, and today's challenge was unlike anything they'd faced before. The Intergalactic Survival Academy, known across the stars as ISA, was no ordinary training facility. It wasn't built for the weak or the privileged. It was built to forge resilience from raw arrogance, to transform the brilliant into the capable, and today it would separate theorists from survivors. High above, the imposing figure of Professor Zarno floated down onto the platform that jutted from a steep basalt cliff. His robe shimmered with embedded data scrolls, and his 3 eyes blinked in different rhythms as he scanned the class of 22. Each student hailed from a different world. Many had 4 arms, some had gills, horns, or translucent skin that shifted color with emotion. But among them, one student stood out, not for her physiology but for her simplicity: Tessa Langford, the only human cadet in the academy that cycle. She stood near the back of the group, hands in the pockets of her tan survival jacket, her auburn ponytail pulled through a weathered cap that still bore the faded NASA logo. Her boots were caked in Zeltrician soil, and her tool belt hung loose around her hips, while others carried crystalline tablets, atmospheric gauges, and miniature gravity fields. Tessa's only visible tech was a battered wrist chronometer and a compact emergency beacon clipped to her shoulder. Professor Zarno's deep voice echoed across the plateau, amplified by the embedded sonic conductor in his throat. Today's evaluation will test your adaptability, ingenuity, and most importantly, your instinct to survive. In exactly 12 hours, a classified meteor storm will descend upon this quadrant. Your task is to construct a shelter using only what this planet provides. There will be no delivery, no replicators, no outside help. The announcement rippled through the students like a sonic shockwave. Most of them immediately activated holographic interfaces, scanning topographical data and geological compositions of nearby rock formations. Some students began arguing over the ideal spot to begin construction, others started deploying miniature drones to scout the area. Tessa didn't move at first. She stared up at the sky, squinting as if trying to spot the incoming meteor field with her naked eyes. She wasn't worried about it yet. 12 hours was a long time when your mind was trained to think in moments, not minutes. Then, as the others busied themselves with virtual simulations and technical readouts, she turned and walked down the slope toward the valley below. Her boot steps were silent against the brittle soil. Slung across her back was an old-fashioned foldable shovel, carbon-forged and dull from years of use. The other cadets barely noticed her departure. Corin of Valatrix 4 was busy arguing with Zarnik, a beetle-skinned creature from the Thorn system, over how to best anchor a heat dome in shifting magnetic fields. Meanwhile, Professor Zarno observed without comment. His 3 eyes followed each student with measured curiosity. But when one eye lingered on the receding figure of Tessa, there was a flicker of interest, a subtle twitch of amusement. Down in the valley, Tessa walked until she found a slope that faced away from the oncoming storm direction. The cliff wall offered natural shielding from wind and debris. She knelt and drove the shovel's edge into the ground. The topsoil crumbled easily beneath it. Lay a mix of compacted sediment and soft igneous rock, dense enough to hold shape, soft enough to carve perfect. She marked a large rectangle into the dirt just wide enough to crawl through, then she began digging a sloping tunnel downward, careful to angle it at a gradient that wouldn't collapse under pressure. Her breaths came steadily. There was no need for panic. She knew from experience that fear wasted oxygen and burned calories faster than exertion. As she worked, memories flickered in her mind, her father teaching her how to build root cellars in Montana winters, how to find natural shelter in a ravine, how to use the land instead of fighting it. He'd been a survivalist not by paranoia but by passion. Tessa had grown up building lean-tos and purifying rainwater long before she touched her first data pad. She dug for nearly an hour without pause, her arms moving in rhythm. Every 5 minutes, she checked for air flow, and she kept a small, lightweight candle tucked behind her ear. If the flame dimmed, she knew ventilation was insufficient. She reinforced the tunnel with angled slabs of rock, using her body weight to wedge them into place. There were no nails, no power tools, just leverage and intuition. Back on the ridge, the other cadets had erected scaffoldings made of compressed light and antimatter scaffolds. Some of them had created levitating platforms tethered to electromagnetic anchors. They laughed and exchanged bets about who would win highest marks. One student, Gree of Decrones, mocked the human girl for disappearing. She probably gave up, he snorted, no tech, no chance. By hour 4, Tessa had hollowed out a circular chamber deep beneath the surface. She lined the floor with mossy fibers collected from the cliff's interior. The ceiling was reinforced with interlocked stones. She scavenged polymer insulation from her crash pack and pressed it into the gaps between stones. For lighting, she fashioned a basic oil lamp using biogel from a local plant that oozed flammable resin. It wasn't pretty, but it was warm. Outside, the temperature had dropped sharply, winds picked up, scattering red dust across the students' constructions. Professor Zarno made his rounds, inspecting their progress. He complimented the structure made by Prince Dreven of Narsh, an elegant cube of rotating energy layers, but offered no praise. His tone remained flat, analytical. When the professor returned to the cliff to observe the landscape, he noticed a faint plume of dust rising from the valley. A small circle of stones had appeared near the base of the slope, marking the humans' entry tunnel. There were no tech signatures, no energy signatures, just dirt, stone, and effort. He said nothing. Tessa sat at the edge of the chamber she had built, sipping water from a metal canteen. Her fingers were blistered, her face was smudged with soil, but she felt a rare kind of calm, the kind only earned through sweat and silence. There were still 8 hours to go, but the real work was done, she just had to wait and be ready. A sharp breeze stirred the dust outside Tessa's hidden shelter, as she adjusted the thermal lining of her jacket and leaned back against the curved wall of compacted soil. The silence underground was complete, broken only by the faint rustling of her movements and the occasional creak of shifting rock. Above, the chamber had held its shape well. After the hours of excavation, the air remained dry and breathable. She checked the candle again, the flame burned steadily, satisfied. She reached for the digital thermometer on her belt, tapped it once, and read the temperature, a steady 17 degrees Celsius inside, a stark contrast to the plummeting temperatures outside that had already reached sub-zero readings. She had planned for this drop. Zeltrix 9's climate was known for its violent fluctuations in temperature. Before meteor activity, the wind carried not just dust but electromagnetic surges that scrambled light technology and weakened even the most sophisticated plasma shields. She'd read that in the orientation packet tucked between paragraphs that most cadets had skimmed or ignored. She hadn't. Her arms ached from digging, her wrists were sore from gripping the shovel for hours without rest. She removed her gloves and rubbed her palms, then reached for the canteen and took another slow sip. No one was coming down here. No one had even noticed her leave, and that suited her just fine. She reached for her multi-tool and extended the dull blade to begin shaving narrow grooves along the chamber walls. From her side pouch, she pulled out several coils of raw vine salvaged from the mossy cliff roots and started weaving them into a support net. She hooked one end to a protruding stone and began lacing the net across the ceiling in a crisscross pattern. It wasn't necessary for structural integrity, but she knew that if the vibrations of the meteor storm intensified, the net would catch falling debris and prevent the soil from collapsing directly onto her. The task required precision. Her fingers moved with quiet confidence, her mind focused not on fear but on method. She remembered how her mother used to weave fishing nets on the back porch of their house in Nebraska, humming quietly while working through calloused hands. That memory surfaced now, uninvited but not unwelcome. She allowed it to exist without distraction as she worked her way around the chamber, tying and pulling, anchoring. Above ground, faint tremors began to roll across the surface. She paused, listening carefully. The storm was still hours away, but the planet was reacting early, almost like a warning. She moved quickly, packing a perimeter of the bunker entrance with loose sand and softened resin. Once it hardened, it would seal tightly but still be removable from the inside with a blunt strike. It was crude engineering, but every element had a purpose. She wasn't here to impress with aesthetics, she was here to survive. With the entrance secured, she returned to the central chamber and began sorting her inventory. The crash pack had held basic supplies, nutrient bars, a water filter, an emergency flare, and 2 chemical heat pods. She cracked one and slipped it into her jacket, tucking it against her chest to keep her core temperature regulated. The other she saved, placing it in a sealed pouch beneath her sleeping mat of layered cloth and vine padding. If the temperature dropped further, she would need it for the night. Her final task before rest was creating airflow pockets. She pulled the shovel again and began chiseling out a narrow vertical shaft leading up to the surface, stopping just a few inches before breaking through. She sealed the top with a dampened cloth soaked in the same bioresin she'd used to seal the entrance. The material was permeable enough to allow fresh air to filter in but thick enough to prevent dust or embers from seeping through during the impact. She tested it by holding her palm over the shaft opening. She felt the cool breeze flow in, slow but steady. When she was done, she sank down onto her mat, exhaled deeply, and allowed her muscles to relax for the first time that day. The chamber glowed faintly from the flickering light of her improvised oil lamp, and shadows danced along the walls. In the corners, she had arranged her tools and scraps neatly: the bench, the shovel, the resin containers, the leftover vine segments, and the crushed glowberries she hadn't eaten yet. Even in a bunker made of mud and stone, she couldn't escape her instinct for order. She closed her eyes briefly, not to sleep, sleep would come later, but to listen. Below the surface, sound carried differently. She could hear the distant rumble of alien machinery humming above, as the other cadets scrambled to repair or reinforce their high-tech constructs. Her classmates were brilliant, some had IQs ranked in the top 1 percentile of their species, and they had absorbed millions of gigabytes of technical knowledge, most of which she lacked. But what they possessed in theory, she matched in instinct. Knowledge from books and downloads helped in simulations, but knowledge from hands, sweat, and dirt helped in reality, and right now, this was reality. She knew how they saw her, the human, the outlier, the primitive. Some of them barely spoke to her unless required by class protocols. One of the more arrogant students, Ralvek, a pale, scale-covered male from Janax, had once said she smelled like fermented carbon. She didn't respond, not because she lacked pride but because she saw no value in arguing with creatures who had never eaten a hot meal cooked over a fire or slept under an open sky with no force field above. Let them laugh, let them struggle to reboot malfunctioning drones when the electromagnetic storm hit, let them place their faith in machines that required perfection. She only needed her hands, her breath, and a bit of rock. She lay back, arms folded behind her head, staring up at the net she had strung across the ceiling. The oil lamp flickered once then steadied. The soil around her seemed to pulse with quiet life, like the planet was exhaling gently. She felt strangely connected to it, this alien world she had never seen before. Beneath the noise and pressure of academic competition, there was a rhythm to this place, a pulse that made sense to her. Above her, the first meteor fragments had begun entering the outer atmosphere. She couldn't hear them yet, but she knew the animals had gone silent. The wind outside had shifted direction. Her senses, honed by years of wilderness survival, picked up details the satellites would miss. She wouldn't rest long, there was still reinforcement to do and a final layer of compacted clay she wanted to add to the eastern wall. But for now, for just a moment, she closed her eyes. She was ready. Let the sky fall. The first sound was faint, just a whisper in the earth. Tessa's eyes opened at once, fully alert. She didn't move immediately, simply lay there and listened. The low hum rose gradually, evolving into a trembling pulse that vibrated through the walls of her shelter. Small specks of dust floated down from the ceiling, the netting catching the light from the lamp in slow spirals. Her instincts didn't deceive her, the storm had arrived. She sat up and grabbed her jacket, tightening the belt around her waist. The heat pod inside her inner pocket still radiated warmth, though its energy had faded to a soft pulse. She could already feel the shift in air pressure, each subtle fluctuation a warning. The meteorites were dragging turbulence behind them, and within minutes, the planet's upper crust would begin reacting violently. She pulled on her gloves and crouched near the entrance, placing her palm against the sealed clay wall. A distant rumble echoed through the surface, growing closer with each second. She stayed still, waiting for the tremor to peak. When it did, it came with a cracking roar, deep and resonant, as though the sky itself had torn open. Loose grains of soil trickled down the tunnel, her heart remained steady. She pushed herself away from the wall and moved toward the chamber's western edge, where her equipment was stashed. She unlatched the flap of her emergency pack and retrieved the second heat pod, cracking it and shaking it until it activated. She wedged it into a small crevice near the airflow shaft. As expected, the breeze had slowed and cooled dramatically. She checked the airflow using her palm again, still steady, though thinner. Another wave of vibration surged through the floor, and this time, a loud boom followed. It was close. The impact had struck just over the ridge where the other students had constructed their shelters. She visualized the terrain in her mind, sharp elevation, little natural cover, exposed to skyfall. If the meteors had landed at a sharp angle, the energy rebound would ricochet across the entire slope. She closed her eyes for a second, exhaled, then stood and grabbed the emergency flare from the corner. She didn't plan to use it unless she had to, but instinct told her it would be better to keep it close. Carefully, she moved around the chamber, checking for signs of stress in the walls. She tapped each segment with the butt of the multi-tool, listening for dull thuds or hollow tremors. The structure held, but then came the shriek, not from the planet, from above. The sound sliced through layers of rock and silence, high-pitched and frantic. It was followed by another, deeper cry, desperate, guttural. Tessa's body tensed. It wasn't animal sounds, it was voices, her classmates. She dropped the multi-tool and raced to the entrance, scraping away the resin seal with fast, efficient strikes. The outer plug of compacted sand and clay fell inward, and a rush of cold, sharp air burst through the opening. She ducked low, shielding her face as icy wind whipped past her, bringing with it the acrid stench of scorched soil and ozone. Through the gap, she saw shadows tumbling down the slope. One figure stumbled, falling hard and rolling before scrambling back to its feet. Behind him came two others, both staggering, one half carrying the other. Tessa climbed out of the tunnel, keeping her body low as the wind howled. Her eyes scanned the ridge. Fires burned near the upper scaffolding. At least 3 shelters had collapsed entirely. The gravity domes had flickered out, leaving fragments of machinery embedded in the dirt. One levitating platform had turned sideways and crashed into a crystalline formation, its edges glowing faintly from residual heat. The closest cadet, a male from Zarin, reached her first. His skin was cracked along his jawline from exposure, and his limbs trembled violently. He tried to speak, but his vocal cords only produced a dry rasp. She grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the tunnel. He resisted for a moment, but she didn't give him a choice. She shoved him ahead and pointed into the hole. "Get inside now," she said firmly. He dropped through the opening without argument. By the time she turned back, 2 more cadets were nearing the entrance, one of them limping heavily. The smaller one, a girl with bioluminescent hair from the Arknell system, was trying to support him, her face etched with panic. Tessa didn't hesitate. She grabbed the injured male and hooked his arm around her shoulder, lowering both into a crouch as a second meteor strike cracked into the ridge above. A wave of heat washed over them, followed by a rain of ash and mineral shards. She ducked her head as one shard grazed her arm, leaving a shallow cut along her sleeve. She guided the 2 down into the tunnel, helping them crawl into the shelter chamber. Inside, the others huddled against the walls, breathing heavily and clutching their sides. Tessa scanned them quickly, no signs of internal bleeding, no exposed wounds that couldn't be treated later. She reached for her pack and distributed heat wraps to the weakest of the group, then sealed the tunnel entrance again with fresh layers of resin and earth. Outside, another strike roared across the plateau. The shelter trembled slightly, small flecks of dust dropped from above, but the ceiling net held, the stone reinforcements flexed but did not give. The group sat in stunned silence, the only sound the harsh breaths of exhausted lungs and the occasional whimper from one of the younger cadets. Tessa didn't speak, she didn't need to. Her focus remained on fortifying what remained. She moved along the chamber perimeter, reinforcing the weakest walls with stacked packs and broken tools. The fire from the oil lamp danced across frightened faces. Several of the students couldn't meet her gaze. One, the same male who had mocked her days earlier, sat with his knees pulled to his chest, shaking quietly. Minutes passed. The ground quaked again, this time less violently. The tremors were spreading outward, now moving away from their sector. She recognized the pattern. The first barrage had passed, more might come, but the worst was behind them. Still, she didn't allow herself to relax. She crouched beside the airflow shaft and replaced the filter cloth. Outside, the wind howled, but the debris had thinned and the scent of smoke had faded slightly. She glanced at the group. Several pairs of eyes watched her now, no longer with amusement or judgment, but with something quieter, respect, perhaps, or awe. She didn't care. She moved to the girl from Arknell and checked her pulse. It was fast but steady. The injured male had a mild concussion and some bruised ribs. She applied a save from her kit and placed a heat pod beneath his arm. Slowly, the tension in the room began to ease. Then, from outside came the unmistakable hum of a hovercraft descending. Her brow furrowed, rescue already. She waited unmoving. The ground shook faintly again, but this time not from impact, from propulsion. The hovercraft was close. Through a small slit in the shaft's cover, she glimpsed the reflection of landing lights painting the ridge in dull green. She stood and stepped away from the shaft. It wasn't over yet. Tessa remained still, her breath shallow, her eyes fixed on the faint green glow pulsing through the small ventilation slit. Above, the hum of the hovercraft deepened as it descended, displacing air and dust in heavy waves that sent tremors through the compacted soil of the chamber. The others in the bunker were silent now, sensing the change. No one dared speak, all eyes had shifted to her, not for orders, but for understanding. Somehow, the girl who had spoken the least had become their anchor. She moved to the entrance, slowly crouching beside the sealed plug and listening. The craft's external engines rotated into vertical hover mode, suggesting a controlled landing rather than a panic deployment. This wasn't a search and rescue mission triggered by emergency signals, it was planned, which made her uneasy. She ran her fingers along the dirt wall, pressing her ear closer. A voice filtered through, a crisp mechanical tone followed by another deeper organic one, a translator device. Someone outside was issuing commands. She couldn't make out the words clearly, but the cadence suggested formality, structure, that could only mean one thing: the academy had sent observers, possibly even the professor. A faint knock echoed above, not from her ventilation shaft but from the topsoil, measured and deliberate, 3 strikes, then silence. Not emergency code, not distress, it was the standard ISA field protocol signal, requesting entry. She unsealed the entrance slowly, peeling back the hardened resin and brushing aside the packed dirt. The cold stung her cheeks as the wind reached in. When she poked her head above ground, the full force of the sky struck her senses. Smoke curled from distant impact craters, jagged shards of blackened metal jutted out of the ground like twisted sculpture, and the faint glow of still molten rock shimmered in the cracks. The hovercraft stood parked a dozen meters from her position, its lower lights painting the dust with shifting color. Standing in front of the ship was a tall figure clad in a dark gray cloak, embroidered with thin golden threads, the unmistakable ceremonial field garb of Professor Zarno. His arms were folded behind his back, and his 3 eyes fixed on her with unreadable focus. Beside him stood a shorter being in a white administrative uniform, holding a data pad. Tessa pulled herself out of the bunker, dusted off her knees, and walked toward them without a word. Her posture was calm, though her jaw was set. She could feel the eyes of the other students following her through the tunnel, waiting, watching. When she stopped a few paces away, the professor spoke first. His voice was flat, neutral. "How many cadets are inside your shelter?" She met his gaze. 7, he nodded once. The official tapped something on the data pad. "Casualties?" he asked next. "None, one with concussion symptoms, the rest have surface-level injuries." "Stable," the official scribbled again. Professor Zarno's eyes moved slightly, studying her face. "This structure," he said, gesturing vaguely to the disguised entrance, "you constructed it alone?" She didn't answer immediately, not because she doubted, but because the question was so absurdly out of place. "Yes," she said. "What materials did you use?" She glanced over her shoulder. "Soil, stone, resin from cliff root flora, reinforced with interlaced vine. Manual excavation. No data pad, no drone, no AI scaffolding." The professor tilted his head slightly, as though examining a new species. "Your location was determined based on meteor trajectory, based on slope, shelter, wind behavior, and subsurface density," she replied. "I read the terrain on day 1. A pause followed, the wind picked up again, fluttering the hem of his cloak. "You ignored the standard toolkit provided by the academy." The official interjected, clearly irritated. "That's a violation of field protocol." "I didn't ignore it," she said. "It was inadequate for the conditions, and I didn't see the point in using tools that fail when electromagnetic interference is expected." The professor raised a hand, silencing the official. He stepped closer, his eyes, 3 piercing dark orbs, studied her not with disapproval but with something more analytical. There was no praise in his expression, no warmth, just intense calculation. "Open the shelter," he said. Tessa gave a short nod and turned away. She walked back to the entrance and began clearing the tunnel again, kicking aside the partial seal. The bitter wind pressed against her back. She slid down and called back up, "Send them one at a time, slowly." The professor was the first to descend. His large form barely fit through the tunnel, but he maneuvered with unexpected grace, folding his limbs and lowering himself with practiced precision. When he reached the chamber, he straightened and took in the space silently. His eyes swept the netting above the insulated walls, the layered sleeping mats, the makeshift storage of supplies and medicine. Then he looked at the cadets, most of whom had straightened in the presence of authority, but still bore signs of fatigue. He turned slowly, examining the chamber with a dispassionate eye. Then his gaze landed on the boy with the bruised ribs. He stepped forward and knelt beside him. "Name?" he demanded. The boy struggled to speak. The girl from Arknell spoke up instead. "He's called July, sir, from Quadrant Thorn." The professor nodded and turned back to the entrance. The official dropped down next, followed by a small scanner drone that hovered in place, rotating and beeping softly. The official paced the perimeter with narrow eyes scanning everything. "This shelter is not up to ISA structural code," he said. "It has no atmospheric filtration, no redundant energy source, and no climate regulation system, yet it is the only one that remained intact." The professor said this without turning. The official hesitated, unsure whether to argue, then he made a sour note on his pad. Professor Zarno turned to the group, his tone shifting, deeper, colder. "Your assignments were simple: survive, plan, adapt, not perform, not impress, sir." No one spoke. "Most of you failed." He continued, "You placed your trust in machines without understanding the ground beneath your feet. You built on assumption, on arrogance. Not one of you thought to test electromagnetic thresholds before deploying shield tech. Not one of you reinforced your anchoring structures manually, except her." He pointed toward Tessa, who stood quietly at the side of the chamber she built, "A shelter while you built statements," he said. "She saved you not because she had more knowledge, but because she used what little she had to full effect. She understood the most critical rule in survival: nature does not care how advanced your technology is. He stepped back toward the tunnel. This shelter will be documented. The score for this exercise will be revised. Those who survive, thanks to her actions, will reflect that in their final evaluation. You are dismissed. The silence hung heavy. No one moved. The professor turned to Tessa as he climbed back into the tunnel. He paused, then said without looking at her, "Well done, Langford, but do not mistake necessity for glory. Your knowledge bought time, nothing more. There is always a storm larger than your shovel." With that, he disappeared up the tunnel. The official followed without a word. The drone beeped once, scanned the chamber with a final flicker of light, and zipped after them. When the hum of the hovercraft rose again, Tessa sat down against the wall. The storm outside was fading, but in its wake, something quieter remained. The others looked at her now, with eyes full of questions they wouldn't dare ask. She didn't mind. Let the silence explain what words couldn't. And when the earth grew still, she let her head fall back against the dirt, closed her eyes, and listened to the heartbeat of the planet she had come to understand better than all of them. Tessa woke to quiet, not the strained, watchful silence of tension, but a true stillness, as if the land itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. The tremors had stopped. The air, though thin and cool, no longer carried the sharp sting of ash or ionized particles. Outside the ventilation shaft, she saw pale light filtering in through the resin-covered slit. Morning, a new rotation on Zeltrix 9. The others had not yet stirred. Some still leaned against the curved walls, eyes closed, limbs slack from exhaustion. The boy with the concussion had improved through the night, his breathing now slow and even. The girl from Arknell had fallen asleep, seated upright, her chin tucked against her shoulder, her hand still lightly resting over the boy's chest as if she had kept watch until sleep pulled her under. Tessa moved quietly, checking the oil lamp, almost dry. She extinguished it and packed it away. Then she began clearing the ventilation shaft and tunnel entrance. Dirt crumbled under her touch, dry and loose, no longer hardened by wind or heat. She took it as a good sign. With a final push, she broke through the top layer and felt the soft warmth of sunlight spill across her face. It was weak but steady, filtered through the planet's lavender haze. She took a deep breath, tasted mineral and dust, but no smoke. When she climbed out of the shelter, the devastation hit her fully. The plateau above had changed completely. What was once a clean expanse of academy land had become a fractured stretch of craters, scorched debris, and blackened hills. Entire sections of synthetic structures had collapsed or been swallowed by the earth. The precision of ISA engineering had been reduced to melted metal and charred husks. A dozen stabilization towers had crumpled under their own weight. The ground itself seemed to wear scars. But no bodies, no movement. The professor's hovercraft was gone, no sign of a second deployment. She didn't expect one. She shielded her eyes and scanned the ridge near the far edge. She spotted remnants of what might have been a partially intact dome, its surface collapsed inward but still recognizable by its framework. A thick black trail curved across the dirt, likely from a skidded impact. She walked forward, boots crunching over fragments of glassy meteorite. Her steps were slow, not from pain but from the weight of absorbing everything. Every groove, every scorch mark, every collapsed shield each told a story of unpreparedness, of minds trained to think fast but not deep. She reached the wreckage of the nearest student shelter and knelt beside it. Scattered fragments of a drone lay tangled with the outer plating of a defensive array, one piece still blinked with a soft red light. She pressed her fingers to the broken surface and shut it off. There was no value in mourning broken tech. When she returned to the shelter entrance, the cadets were awake and waiting. No one said anything at first. The girl from Arknell met her gaze, then stood and helped the others to their feet one by one. They climbed out into the daylight, shielding their faces from the pale sun. None of them made noise, even the most arrogant among them. the boy who had dismissed her completely during the first training, kept his head low as he stepped out. Tessa said nothing, she didn't need to. Their silence was no longer filled with judgment, it was filled with realization. Once they had gathered, she led them down the ridge. The walk was long, no hovercrafts waited, no instructions had been broadcast. The ISA wanted them to return on foot to process the land they had trained on, to see it now not as a testing ground, but as a mirror of their choices. An hour into the descent, they spotted a long, black vehicle waiting at the basin, a crawler, half buried in dust but unmistakably ISA property. Its loading bay was open, no escorts, no medical staff, just a tablet mounted by the entrance hatch with one glowing screen, return log names. Each cadet approached the panel, entered a code, then climbed inside. When it was Tessa's turn, she stepped forward, entered her ID, and paused. Below her name was a line of text she hadn't expected, evaluation complete. Survival rating 100%. Field leadership score revised to maximum. She stared at the words for a moment, not out of pride, but because she had never cared about the metrics before. They had always seemed so far removed from what mattered, and yet now, after everything, it felt like more than numbers, it felt like vindication, not just for her methods but for the idea that intelligence wasn't always louder, brighter, or faster. Sometimes it was quiet, stubborn, and built one shovel full at a time. She climbed into the crawler last. The others had taken their seats, no one spoke, but a few gave her small nods, not forced, not out of obligation, just small acknowledgments of truth. When the crawler lurched forward and began the long trip back to the Academy's central hub, she rested her head against the window and closed her eyes. 3 days later, the cadet stood in a long hall of polished stone beneath the Academy dome. A review ceremony had been scheduled, no guests, no parents, no press, just students and faculty. Professor Zarno stood on the raised platform, his cloak was lighter now, the ceremonial trim replaced with standard black. He stepped forward and read the results one by one. Names were called, some were praised for resilience, others for teamwork. Then came the final name, Langford, Tessa. She walked forward, shoulders squared, face calm, structure sound. Survival confirmed. Leadership observed. Recommendation, advance to planetary field program, assignment, instructor support. A murmur rose among the students. Assignment to instructor support meant she would join the next class as an assistant, a prestigious honor given only to those whose performance had exceeded protocol. The professor handed her a data badge. His voice dropped just slightly, enough for only her to hear, "You bent the rules but not for ego. That matters." She nodded once and returned to her place. That evening, as the sun dipped beneath the dusty horizon of Zeltrix 9, Tessa stood at the edge of the old training ridge. The ground still bore the marks of fire and chaos, but the winds had softened and the dust settled like memory, coating every sharp edge with time. She sat on the cliff's edge, legs swinging slightly, and stared out over the scarred valley, not with bitterness but with clarity. This wasn't her home, it never would be. But out here, far from Earth, she had carved her place into something permanent, not in stone, or rank, or recognition, but in the survival of others. And that, she decided, was enough. Let the storms come.